The twins refused to eat, until the new nanny surprised them. And the millionaire father saw it. The two-story wooden house nestled among crimson maple trees in the quiet suburbs of Vermont. From the outside, it looked like something pulled straight from an autumn postcard. A wide porch, large windows, steps covered in crisp, fallen leaves. But inside, there was no sound except the ticking of the hallway clock. No hurried footsteps, no children's laughter. Just silence, dense and heavy, as if someone had muted life itself. People still called it the most beautiful house on the street. But for over a year now, no one had seen the warm lights flickering late at night, nor smelled the scent of apple pie drifting from the kitchen. Everything seemed to have stopped the day Grace, the woman of the house, never came home again. After the sudden accident, Andrew, her husband, a novelist and editor, retreated inward, burying himself in manuscripts and quiet. He never cried in front of anyone, but everyone knew something inside him had shattered. Their 7-year-old twins, Ben and Sophie, had changed too. Once playful and full of chatter, they had gone completely silent, refusing food, refusing comfort. Andrew had hired nanny after nanny, each one impeccable on paper. But none lasted more than 2 weeks, not because the children were unkind, but because they were unreachable, locked in a world no one else seemed allowed to enter. The caregivers left one by one, and the house grew emptier with each departure. Then, on a cloudy autumn morning, with leaves carpeting the front steps, a woman named Eleanor arrived. She had no outstanding degrees, no international experience. Just a quiet presence and eyes that listened. No one knew it then, but the moment she walked through that old wooden gate, something unseen had already begun to shift. Once upon a time, that house used to hum like a summer melody. Weekend mornings were filled with the scent of coffee, blending with the soft notes of piano played by Grace in the living room. On cozy evenings, Andrew would read manuscripts while Ben and Sophie built blanket forts in the hallway, laughter echoing through the walls. Nothing extravagant, just presence, just togetherness. And that was enough. Grace was the heartbeat of the home. She baked nearly every afternoon, tended the little vegetable garden behind the kitchen, and always found a way to gather everyone, even if just for hot cocoa and a bedtime story. Being a mother to her wasn't a duty. It was a gift. She had the uncanny ability to turn everything, from a slightly burnt pie to a child's tantrum, into something gentle, almost tender. Andrew was a man of words, a writer, an editor at a literary journal. He wasn't expressive, not one to wear emotions on his sleeve, but he loved his family in quiet ways. A passing hug, a sticky note on a lunchbox, a short story written just for his children's birthdays. He and Grace were opposite elements, one sunlight, the other a cool, comforting shade. When the accident happened, everything shattered. A heavy rain, a slick curve, a car that skidded and never made it home. Grace died at the scene, and overnight the house lost its center. Andrew didn't scream. He didn't rage. He just sat in her old chair as if listening for her voice still whispering through the walls. Ben and Sophie reacted differently. They didn't cry much. They just went quiet, painfully quiet. They refused to eat, to play, to let anyone touch the things their mother had left behind. Each day, the silence in the house grew thicker. Andrew's efforts, from making breakfast to reading stories, fell into a void, unnoticed, unreceived. He tried everything: child therapists, grief counselors, nannies with impressive backgrounds. None stayed. Ben and Sophie didn't throw tantrums, didn't shout or break things. They just withdrew. And it was that stillness, more than any outburst, that drove people to tears before walking away in helplessness. Mrs. Delaney, the elderly housekeeper who had worked with the family for over 15 years, was the only one who didn't give up. She was the one who remembered Eleanor, not from a fancy agency, just a scrap of paper she had tucked in her wallet after witnessing something small but unforgettable. Eleanor gently helping a lost child find their mother in a grocery store, not with words, but with patience and eyes that understood. And that's why, even with uncertainty and a heart full of doubt, Andrew said yes. Because maybe he knew, deep down, that what this house needed wasn't listed on a resume or found in polished credentials. It was something quieter, someone who could walk in without making the walls tremble all over again. Eleanor arrived on a cloudy Monday morning, with mist still hanging low over the wooden fence and maple leaves clinging with the dampness of the night before. She stepped off a suburban bus, carrying a worn backpack, a brown leather notebook, and a hand-knit scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. There was no grand introduction, no rolling suitcase or heels clacking against the steps. Eleanor arrived quietly, like an autumn breeze that needed no announcement. It was Mrs. Delaney who opened the door and led her through the side entrance into the kitchen, a path only the house staff ever used. "They're not easy," she said simply, her voice neither cold nor hopeful. "But I think you might be the one to make them lift their heads again." Eleanor said nothing. She just offered a soft smile, nodded in response, and removed her shoes at the threshold, as if she had belonged here long before this moment. Within the first 30 minutes, she had asked for the names of every staff member, noted down meal routines, allergies, and the children's past preferences. Not on her phone, just with a tiny pencil and the notebook worn soft by time. She didn't rush to meet the children. Eleanor quietly walked the hallways, pausing at crooked paintings, breathing in the scent of aged wood and the ghost of apple pie still lingering in the corners. The house felt like it had stopped mid-breath, a space suspended between silence and memory. Upstairs, the children's room was slightly ajar. Ben and Sophie sat on the carpet, each absorbed in their tablets. They didn't look up when they heard footsteps. Eleanor didn't speak. She slowly knelt, picking up stray pillows from the floor, arranging them carefully, as if piecing back something long broken. Then she sat beside them, keeping a respectful distance, and pulled a small folded note from her coat pocket, placing it gently between the two. On it was a hand-drawn sketch. 2 sleeping foxes curled beneath a canopy of leaves, beside a line written in soft pencil. "If one day you're tired, I can lie quietly beside you." Sophie glanced at the drawing, then at Eleanor, and turned back to her screen. Ben didn't react. Eleanor didn't push further. She simply sat there, hands resting on her knees, eyes looking out the window, as if waiting for something wordless to begin. When Mrs. Delaney called down for lunch, Eleanor stood and stepped lightly out of the room. Before she left, she turned once and said gently, as if to the air itself, "I'll stay, if you want me to." She ate just a little, then asked for permission to help in the kitchen. She wanted to take in the scent of the house, the spices, the daily routines. That evening, the twins once again found the drawing on their pillow. This time, they tucked it away in a drawer. The next day, Eleanor didn't say much. She rose early, helped Mrs. Delaney prepare breakfast, washed cups, wiped the counters with an old cloth, then stepped out back to cut a few wild daisies and place them in a small jar on the table. Everything she did was quiet, almost soundless, as if she was careful not to break anything else that had already cracked within this house. That afternoon, Eleanor brought out a set of colorful clay, placing each little tub on a checkered tablecloth. She didn't call anyone, didn't make a scene. She simply sat down on a wooden chair on the porch and began to mold tiny creatures, a red bird, a yellow turtle, a blue house with a round window. Before long, Ben appeared. He said nothing, standing at the edge of the table, watching the strange little shapes. Eleanor didn't ask if he wanted to join. She just kept molding. After a while, he pulled out a chair, sat down, and began shaping something with his small hands. It was a fox, blue, with a long tail and folded ears. Eleanor didn't praise him. No good job. Shum. No excited clapping. She simply looked at the fox, smiled gently, as if it were the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. And Ben, for the first time in many days, glanced at her, not for long, but just enough to leave a crack in the silence. The next day, Sophie came. She didn't speak, just sat beside Eleanor, picked up some purple clay, and began shaping a tiny owl. No one asked anything. But that afternoon, the three of them sat together for over an hour, only the soft sound of fingers pressing clay and strange little shapes coming to life on the table. Eleanor never tried to be close. She didn't ask too many questions, didn't touch, didn't sweet talk. She was just present, close enough to be seen, far enough not to intrude. And somehow, that made the children feel safe. That weekend, Eleanor asked if she could prepare dinner for the children. Mrs. Delaney was surprised, but didn't object. Eleanor made small rice balls shaped like hearts, stars, and suns. She sliced carrots into thin petals, sautéed purple cabbage into violet swirls curling around each plate. She set the table on the back porch using an animal print cloth and placed a bunny-folded napkin next to each dish. When Ben and Sophie arrived, Eleanor was already seated, her brown notebook resting in her lap. "Tonight's dinner is a secret mission," she said, voice soft but warm. "Each edible star unlocks the next level, but only if both players cooperate." The children looked at each other, still hesitant. Then Sophie lifted her spoon first. She tasted a rice ball, made a slight face, then nodded. Ben quietly followed, and for the first time they finished an entire meal. Eleanor said nothing more, but as they got up, she touched her notebook and softly wrote, "Mission 1, Success." In the days that followed, Eleanor created more adventures. One day she told a story about a clan of vegetarian dragons whose secret to flying was eating orange carrots. Another, she mapped out a treasure hunt, hiding clues beneath dinner plates, each dish a puzzle piece. Meals were no longer battlegrounds. They became quests. At night, she left hand-drawn notes beneath their pillows, not lessons, but soft affirmations. "You were brave today," or, "If you dream something strange, tell me in the morning." No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. The house had started breathing again. Andrew came back on a Sunday afternoon, a few days earlier than expected. He didn't say anything. His work trip to New York had wrapped up faster than planned, and for some reason this time, he didn't want to linger in the hotel to finish the last edits. Instead, he caught the earliest train back to Vermont. The driver offered to take him in through the main gate, as usual, but Andrew shook his head lightly. "I'll walk from here." He got off at the end of the maple-lined road, carrying only a small bag. The short slope leading up to the house was covered in fallen leaves, their crisp sound underfoot pulling him back into something he hadn't felt in a long time. As he neared the wooden gate, Andrew stopped. A scene unfolded before him, and he nearly couldn't take another step. On the backyard lawn, Ben and Sophie were sitting on a red picnic blanket. In front of them were little bear-shaped cakes, apple juice in plastic cups, and a few wild daisies tangled in Sophie's hair. Eleanor sat between them, hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, holding a notebook, surely the familiar brown one, while telling them something. All three were laughing, not politely, not out of obligation, but real laughter, round, full, alive. Sophie leaned her head on Eleanor's shoulder. Ben clapped when she drew something funny with a spoon on the cake. The sky above was pale blue, and the clouds drifted slowly, as if they too were listening to her story. Andrew stood frozen. No one noticed him right away. And for those brief few seconds, he felt like an intruder, stumbling upon something too intimate, too beautiful to interrupt. He had thought this house would remain quiet forever, like his own heart. But now, seeing this, he realized he missed it, missed the laughter, the scent of baked treats. The days before, it all slipped away. Eleanor was the first to look up. She saw him and smiled. There was no flustered greeting. "No, Mr. Hart, you're back." Just a gentle look and a small nod, as if she had somehow known he would arrive at this exact moment. Moments later, Ben turned. His eyes lit up instantly. "Dad!" he shouted, running toward Andrew. Sophie followed, laughing. They hugged him, one on each side, wrapping themselves around his legs. The warmth of their little bodies overwhelmed him. Andrew knelt down, pulling them both into his arms, eyes suddenly wet, without understanding why. For the past year, every touch had felt like touching grief. But now, in that embrace, all he felt was life. When he looked up, Eleanor was still there, not moving closer, not stepping back, just watching, quietly, as if guarding a sacred moment that didn't need to be broken. And in that silent exchange of glances, Andrew understood. He didn't know exactly what she had done, but she had reached a place he never thought anyone could, the hearts of his children, and maybe his own. After Andrew's return, things began to shift, not through plans or spoken decisions, but in small, gentle rhythms that everyone could feel. No new rules were made, no announcements declared, yet each day carried a quiet pulse of something new, something alive. Eleanor introduced rituals, not loud or forced, but soft spaces where connection could bloom on its own. At lunch, she'd pick a new theme each day. Day of the Space Traveler, Vegetarian Dragon Feast, or the secret birthday of a talking bear. The food was always part of the story. Green beans became enchanted gems, carrots were light swords, potatoes turned into spaceships. Ben and Sophie didn't just eat, they joined the mission. They searched for secret ingredients, guessed the powers of each vegetable, and invented new names for every dish. Andrew, at first, simply observed. He would sit at the end of the table, quietly sipping tea, listening to Eleanor's stories, watching his children's smiles become more effortless. But one afternoon, he brought out a jug of homemade lemonade and placed it on the table. "This," he said, "is the anti-sleeping potion." Ben burst into laughter. From that moment, Andrew became part of the game. In the evenings, Eleanor began reading to the children before bed. Not just reading, but adding voices, making up side plots, pausing to ask, "If you were this character, what would you do?" Sophie liked to sit close beside her. Ben sometimes rested his head on her lap. Andrew would occasionally sit just outside the room, never stepping in, but never walking away either, listening to her voice float through the soft glow of the nightlight. One night, a storm rolled in, and the power went out. The house fell into darkness, and wind howled outside. Sophie rushed down the stairs, wide-eyed. Ben followed, clutching his teddy bear. Eleanor lit candles and built a blanket fort in the living room. "We're in an enchanted forest now," she whispered. "The wind is dragons flying, and the thunder? That's their laughter." Andrew stood still, watching it all. Eleanor, sitting between his children, candlelight flickering in her eyes, holding a worn fairy tale book, and felt his heart slow. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace inside his own home. There were no love declarations, no grand gestures. But after that night, Eleanor always brewed an extra cup of tea in the evening, and Andrew always passed by the kids' room just to catch the last few minutes of the story. They didn't date. They didn't speak of anything beyond the day-to-day. But with each passing moment, these small rituals wove invisible threads between 3 people, and now 4, into a rhythm where roles didn't matter, where closeness didn't need to be defined. Only presence. Only quiet, honest presence. One cloudy afternoon, just after a light rain had passed and the sky turned a soft pale gold, Sophie asked, "Was my mom afraid of the dark?" The question came while Eleanor was reorganizing books in the living room. No warning, no signs, just a small voice, breaking months of silence. Eleanor paused. She didn't turn right away, didn't rush to answer. She simply placed the book down, turned around, and sat on the rug. "No," Eleanor said gently. "Your mom loved the nightlight. I think she always left it on during storms, just like I do." Sophie nodded, then stayed quiet. She didn't cry, didn't speak again. But her expression softened, as if simply hearing someone speak about her mother in a normal way, without sorrow or secrecy, was enough. From then on, the questions began, sparingly, not every day, but enough to keep the door open. Ben asked, "Does Dad still have Mom's coat?" Sophie wanted to see old pictures. One evening, all three of them sat with Eleanor flipping through an album for the first time since the funeral. Eleanor didn't say much. She simply listened, nodded, and smiled when Sophie pointed to a photo of Grace beaming, carrying both kids on her shoulders. One night, Eleanor came down with a light cold. She excused herself early and rested upstairs. For the first time since her arrival, there was no bedtime story. The house felt oddly still. Ben paced the hallway. Sophie sat on the stairs, hugging a pillow. Andrew felt the emptiness like a color fading from the air. He went to the kitchen, made a cup of ginger tea, and gently knocked on Eleanor's door. When she opened it, hair tousled, eyes tired, he held up the tea and a small crumpled paper scribbled with colored pencil. In childish handwriting, it read, "Get well soon, Miss Eleanor. Our house is sad without you." Eleanor read it, and for the first time in front of Andrew, her eyes filled with tears. Not from illness, but because finally she could feel it fully. She belonged here. From that day on, Andrew started noticing more, not out of duty, but desire. He lingered longer at the table, helped Eleanor slice fruit, folded bunny napkins with the kids. He began organizing the bookshelves he'd ignored for nearly a year. In those quiet moments, his eyes often found Eleanor, and whenever she was smiling at the children, his heart would skip a beat. She never tried to be close. She didn't invade anyone's space. But her subtle presence made her present everywhere. That evening, with the children asleep, Eleanor remained in the kitchen, prepping toast and milk for the next morning. Andrew stepped in, said nothing, leaned against the counter, and watched her move with calm care. "You've done something I didn't think was possible," he said, voice low. Eleanor didn't reply immediately. She sealed a container, wiped her hands, and looked into his eyes. "Some things don't disappear," she said softly. "They just hide for a while. And sometimes, with enough patience, they come back." Andrew nodded, said nothing more. But as he turned to leave, he knew this woman had done more than heal. She had given this house something he thought was forever gone: hope. The connection between Eleanor and Andrew didn't begin with a spark. There was no dramatic moment, no lingering gaze at sunset. It arrived like everything else in this house, quietly, slowly, almost unnoticed. It was the time Eleanor stood on a folding ladder, reaching for a box of old books, and Andrew walked in just in time to steady her hand without a word. Or the morning they both reached for the coffee pot and paused, not out of awkwardness, but because the gesture felt familiar, known. Their feelings didn't need to be named, but their presence was slowly becoming undeniable. One early winter day, as soft snow settled on the porch roof, Andrew invited Eleanor for coffee in the garden, the same bench where Grace used to read. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. They sat on the old wooden seat, each with a cup of steaming coffee, wrapped in wool scarves. The children were tossing snowballs nearby, their laughter filling the cold air like a melody. Andrew spoke of his childhood in a small Midwestern town where winters froze even dreams. Eleanor told him about her mother, a woman who grew daisies on the balcony and always left the door open for the morning sun. The conversation wasn't deep, but it was real. It wasn't long, but it was enough to open a space neither had dared touch in a long time. At one point, Eleanor grew quiet, eyes on the bare trees beyond the fence. Then she said, "I don't know how long I'll stay." It wasn't a threat of departure, just truth. She had no solid plans, and she said it with care, as if afraid to hurt something delicate that had just begun to grow. Andrew held his coffee a little tighter, eyes on the space ahead. After a moment, he spoke, softly. "I can't imagine this house without you." They didn't say more, but in their eyes something had been acknowledged. Not a promise, not a confession, just a silent agreement that they both understood. Something was blooming quietly between them. That night, Eleanor climbed the stairs more slowly than usual. Her heart beat to a different rhythm. In her room, she sat at the edge of the bed, opened her brown notebook, and didn't write full sentences, just scattered words. The fire, the warmth, doesn't need a name. On the other side of the house, Andrew couldn't sleep. He wandered the living room, stood at the window where he used to wave goodbye to Grace each morning. And for the first time, the memory didn't hurt. It made him grateful for having loved. And now, for learning how to love again in a different way. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no special dinner to mark the change. But on a snowy day in early January, someone, maybe Sophie, said something so simple, so natural. "Miss Eleanor, what's our family having for dinner today?" And no one corrected her. No one reminded them that Eleanor wasn't family, because somewhere along the way she had become part of it. Her name showed up in crayon drawings stuck to the fridge, in Ben's made-up bedtime stories, in Sophie's tiny journal. The handwritten notes tucked under pillows at night were no longer surprises. They were staples. Eleanor was everywhere, not in a loud way, but like a familiar scent, a soft light in the kitchen each morning. Andrew noticed it one afternoon while slicing fruit beside her. Sophie burst in from outside, snow-drenched and excited, throwing her arms around Eleanor. "I wish Mom could see you teaching me how to make snowflakes," she said. "She'd really love it." The words didn't sadden Andrew. Instead, they filled him with something unfamiliar he hadn't dared to name: peace. That evening, Eleanor read bedtime stories as usual. Ben fell asleep first. Sophie touched Eleanor's wrist and whispered, "Stay with us for a long time, okay?" Eleanor didn't answer with words. She simply gave that small hand a gentle squeeze, smiling in a way that said more than any sentence ever could. Andrew stood in the hallway. He didn't step in. He didn't speak. But he heard and he understood. Family isn't always written in documents or bound by blood. Sometimes it's made of presence. It's where your heart quietly decides to stay. Spring arrived late in the suburbs. The first flowers bloomed slowly around the porch. The snow melted into puddles where Ben and Sophie jumped through like it was an endless childhood game. The old house, once cold and heavy, now echoed with laughter and the smell of baked goods each morning. Eleanor kept her usual rhythm, the kitchen light on before dawn, napkins folded into silly shapes, and morning notes written in her slanted handwriting. But now one thing was different. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was part of the rhythm. Andrew no longer avoided old memories. Sometimes he paused in front of faded photos, smiling when Ben asked, "Dad, tell us how you used to make Mom laugh." And he told them, not with a lump in his throat, but with quiet gratitude for what once was and what now is. One Sunday afternoon, the four of them, Andrew, Eleanor, Ben, and Sophie, gardened together. No one talked about the future. No one asked, "What next?" They simply existed together in a moment that felt whole. As the evening sun streamed through the kitchen window, Sophie taped a new drawing to the fridge. It showed a house with a chimney, flowers on the porch, and 4 people holding hands. Above it, in uneven letters, she'd written, "Our home." Eleanor stared at it, silent. Andrew stood behind her, saying nothing, just resting a hand gently on her back. Just enough for her to know this was the place she'd been chosen to belong. A year after Eleanor officially moved in, spring returned to the quiet suburbs. Tulips bloomed brightly around the backyard, and the laughter of Sophie and Ben still echoed through golden afternoons. Things didn't have to be perfect to feel beautiful. Slow mornings with toast and orange juice, quiet nights folding paper, reading books, and watching old films. All of it became part of what made this house a home. One early April evening, while they were all gathered in the living room, Andrew pulled out a small square box wrapped in a white ribbon. He looked at Eleanor, eyes soft but certain. "I don't know when the perfect moment is, but I do know this. You're the best thing that's ever happened to us." Eleanor froze. Ben and Sophie's eyes went wide, then lit up. "We knew," Sophie blurted. "He's been planning this for weeks." Andrew chuckled, dropped to one knee, and opened the box. "Will you marry me, Eleanor? Be my wife? Be the heart of this house?" Eleanor didn't speak. She just nodded, slowly, tearfully, because she already knew she belonged. Laughter filled the room. Applause. Two small hands clapping with joy, and a happiness too big for words. The wedding took place on an early autumn afternoon, right in the backyard, the same place that had seen their first picnics, Sophie's flower planting lessons, and the quiet moments when Andrew realized his heart had opened again. There were no elaborate rituals, no choir, just the people who truly mattered, a few old friends of Eleanor's, Andrew's family, close neighbors, and of course Ben and Sophie, each holding wildflower petals, gently scattering them along the narrow path lined with white stones. Eleanor wore a soft ivory dress, her hair loose, her smile constant. Andrew, in a simple white shirt, couldn't take his eyes off her. And in that moment, with her walking toward him, he felt something settle deep inside, like a final piece of himself clicking back into place. As they exchanged vows, a soft breeze rustled through the trees, yellow leaves falling onto the grass as if nature itself was blessing their love. Sophie leaned over to Ben and whispered, "It's like a real fairy tale." Ben nodded, smiling, "But it's the kind we get to live in." That evening, under twinkling string lights hung across the garden, the whole family danced together. Jasmine slept peacefully in her grandmother's arms, while Eleanor and Andrew swayed slowly to soft music, their eyes saying everything no words ever needed to. Months later, on a radiant summer morning, Eleanor shared the news. She was pregnant. Andrew embraced her tightly. Ben and Sophie ran around the living room like it was the best holiday of their lives. "It's a girl," Sophie declared with conviction. "We have to name her Jasmine," Ben added. They didn't actually know yet, but when the doctor confirmed it was indeed a girl, the whole family said in unison, "Welcome, Jasmine." Jasmine was born on a calm afternoon in mid-July. Sunlight poured through the hospital windows, casting long shadows over the three people waiting just outside the delivery room. Andrew, Ben, and Sophie, each holding a bunch of wildflowers. When Eleanor held Jasmine for the first time, Sophie whispered, "Mom, I've never felt this happy before." Andrew sat beside her, hand resting gently on Eleanor's shoulder. No one said another word. They didn't need to. A few days later, Jasmine came home, to the house where laughter had returned, where love was built from quiet moments, and where even the walls seemed to smile. That afternoon, the whole family sat out on the back porch, where flowers still bloomed, and the wind danced through the white curtains. Eleanor cradled Jasmine in her arms. Andrew sat beside her, holding her hand. Ben and Sophie lay on the grass, pointing at clouds and imagining animals. Bathed in warm light, the picture of family was complete. No one called it a happy ending, because truly it was just the beginning.